What's up and welcome to another episode of Gizmo Slip Tech. Today we're going to be comparing the Galaxy S9, voila, versus the iPhone X, voila. Now both cameras have dual 12 megapixel cameras on the back, a wide angle and a telephoto. The only difference in apertures is the iPhone X has an f1.8 aperture while the S9 has an f1.5 on the wide angle camera. For the front facing cameras, the iPhone X has a 7 megapixel shooter and it's paired up with depth sensors that allows for more accurate depth sensing when doing portraits with the front-facing camera. The Galaxy S9 has an 8 megapixel front-facing camera with an f-stop of f1.7. The special features for the iPhone X is the portrait mode and the additional lighting modes that it has to simulate different types of light, which are really cool and can come in handy when taking a selfie or a photo of a friend. The Galaxy S9, on the other hand, has a super slow-mo mode going at 960 frames per second. The iPhone X is capable of filming at 240 frames per second at 1080p continuously, while the Galaxy S9's continuous slow-mo only recorded 165 frames per second in our test footage. There's a few other intelligent modes with the S9, such as detecting which food you're eating, translating words from one language to another. I tested these out and it was very hit and miss. Honestly, I don't think anyone's going to use those features at all. Maybe in a pinch you'll try to translate something, but ultimately if you're going to do a lot of translating, Google Translate is much better because it tries to understand the overall context of what's going on rather than translating each individual word without trying to get an overall meaning from it. Now the Galaxy S9 is the first smartphone camera to feature a dual aperture. It can switch physically from an f1.5 to f2.4. f1.5 will increase the amount of light that comes in and increase the amount of bokeh. The increased light will reduce handshake blur, especially in questionable scenes when the shutter speed is reaching low enough to where handshake blur can cause loss of detail. Now the f2.4 can potentially increase sharpness by expanding the amount of things that are in focus. But the downside is you reduce the total amount of light coming into the lens, reducing the shutter speed, sometimes causing handshake blur when it shouldn't. But the main thing is that it reduces the amount of bokeh that you get naturally in your photos, which I think is a big bummer because smartphones already don't produce hardly any bokeh as it is, and I want my smartphone to produce as much bokeh as possible unless I'm trying to do like a landscape photo where I want everything to be in focus. Or maybe if I'm trying to record myself in video mode and I just am moving around too much for autofocus to keep up. In those situations, I might want to go to f2.4. But for just about everything else, I would like all my photos to be in f1.5. There is some controversy about whether or not Samsung is doing a good job switching between f1.5 and f2.4, but just know that generally speaking, if you're in a bright environment, it's going to shoot at f2.4 all the time, and if you're in a super dim environment, it's going to switch over to f1.5. Now there's no way that you can change this in auto mode. You have to switch to pro mode to be able to switch back and forth between the apertures. What I would prefer is in auto mode if I could set a default aperture to 1.5 and then I can manually switch it to f2.4 when I feel the need. Sadly, the only way for me to do this currently is by going into pro mode all the time and manually switching it, which is pretty annoying. Now, which of these cameras is going to take better overall photos? I snapped a whole bunch of them and they were all taken in auto mode except for a handful when I was trying to test out the f1.5 aperture, which I will mention when we get there. Let's dive into it. Here we have the shot of my set. Now both cameras have great detail here, but if you zoom in, you can tell that the S9 has sharper overall detail, especially when looking at the rug. This shot of Poseidon turned out great, but again the S9 has more detail, but the downside here is that the bokeh is lessened quite a bit because of the new f2.4 aperture. Notice how the iPhone X has creamier, better natural bokeh. Here we have the rear cameras again. This time I've gone into pro mode and switched the aperture to f1.5. You can see the increased natural bokeh from the S9 and it is even more creamy than the iPhone X now. You can get amazing bokeh without having to use the portrait mode, which I think is absolutely amazing. The amount of natural bokeh of the Galaxy S9's f1.5 is incredible. You can really tell a difference in this photo when you look at how blurred out my beard is when compared to the iPhone X being completely in focus. In the shot of Louis, you can see the iPhone X blurs out his nose and the background better. This shot was taken with the S9 in auto mode, and that means it's at f2.4 once again. The overall image is very sharp, but the iPhone X has blurriness on his nose and in the background, isolating his eyes, and I much prefer that natural bokeh overall. Oddly enough, in this low light photo of my game room downstairs, the iPhone X overexposed and lost quite a lot of of detail, while the S9 maintained the detail much better, as you can see by looking at the railing around the pool table. This low light shot of me in the hallway demonstrates how each phone handles low light processing. Notice the red color of my shirt is washed out on the iPhone X and the image is much noisier. But it only looks that way because the S9 has smoothed out the image so much that it has lost a lot of detail. You can really see the loss of detail when comparing the hairs on my beard. Comparing this shot of the tiki torches shows that the S9 overexposed a tad, losing some detail in the brighter areas of the image. The bird statue looks great in both images, but if you zoom in, the iPhone X does look a tad better. Here the S9 is again a tad brighter, but the detail in both images are great. I'd say it's a tie here. With HDR mode, I noted two major things. The S9 really brings out the color of the grass, while the iPhone X really brings out the blue of the blue sky. In addition, the tree in the foreground looks quite surreal on the iPhone X due to the extra sharpening. Overall, I think I prefer the blue of the iPhone X here, but it's a close call. That said, the under the deck HDR shot really lets the S9 shine, capturing much better detail under the deck and in the shadows in this very difficult scene. With the front camera, the iPhone X has a rugged, natural look, while the S9 has a bright and airy look. It should also be noted the S9 has skin smoothing enabled by default in selfie mode. I personally prefer the more rugged look of the iPhone, but to each his own. In this case, I think it's an overall tie. The front camera portrait mode was both hit and miss depending on where you look with both phones. Both look pretty good overall. The main advantage for the iPhone is its depth sensing camera being able to tell three-dimensionally if an object is actually physically further away, while the S9 is just stuck guessing based on software. Now the S9 can certainly do a good job, but you can see the difference here if you look at my t-shirt. You can see that the iPhone does blur it out, while the S9 software is tricked into keeping it perfectly in focus. That said, if you do crop in, you can see quite a bit more detail with the S9, and that's probably partially because of the increased megapixels of the front camera. As far as video stabilization goes, the Galaxy S9 has significant perspective warping at 60 frames per second 4K, and that's because digital video stabilization is disabled when shooting at that frame rate. The iPhone X handles 4K 60 frames per second much better, but once you reduce everything down to 4K 30 frames per second, the S9's video stabilization really shines, and I think it's much better than the iPhone X. As far as front cameras go, I think the S9's front video mode has much more potential because it can record in 1440p, and it also has autofocus. Audio-wise, the S9 has stereo audio recording and comes across much louder and is more sensitive to smaller noises, though you can increase the gain on the iPhone X to get similar results. Overall, I think they have about the same level of clarity. The background should blow out and expose continually from my face. If my face goes out of exposure, that's the real issue here, so should get a lot better as I turn back this way. And wow, that is bright light! Okay. Let's see how that looks. And let's see also how well is it maintaining focus on the face. Samsung's supposed to have continuous autofocus for the first time on the S9 on a front-facing camera. So that's good and bad, I suppose, because if you have the focus set perfectly on your face at the beginning, then it's not going to wander or go anywhere. But if it's on autofocus mode and it's seeking around, then maybe it's going to focus on my background, for example, when it should be just focused on my face, which I think I noticed it did just a moment ago. So let's go ahead and see now. My face is very shiny. Not very much dynamic range, showing off how shiny my face is. When recording video, I've noticed two things about the Galaxy S9. Sometimes it has a little bit of stuttery lag when you're filming 4K video. In addition, when you're editing the video on a PC, there's about a 2-second delay that happens on some of the clips. This is especially true when doing long format recording. This is caused by the variable frame rate that the S9 shoots at. This used to happen with the iPhone as well. I haven't used the iPhone X enough to know for sure if it's an issue on the iPhone X. So this is me talking, and I'll move the camera back and forth so hopefully you can see if it gets stuttery or not. If you drop this clip into most editing software, the audio desync issue will be very strong and very sad. I really hope Samsung gets this fixed on their phones going forward. Dun dun dun! In addition, I'm having a difficult time connecting the iPhone X to my computer, which makes it very difficult to transfer photos and videos, and it keeps happening no matter which computer I'm using, my Aorus, my Razer, and my desktop, and that's incredibly annoying. Overall, which camera do I think is better? Well, I think the iPhone 10 has a more rugged look to the photos. They tend to be more surreal, a little more gritty, and that's also due to how the iPhone 10 processes their images. The Galaxy S9, on the other hand, seems very bright, very airy almost. The iPhone 10 skews to the blue, while the S9 skews a little bit to the green spectrum. Overall, the S9 is going to have slightly better low light photos, and I do like its HDR mode quite a bit more. That said, I do like the portrait mode just a little bit more on the iPhone 10. Both of these cameras are fantastic, and I'd be happy with either one of them in my pocket. I personally go with the Galaxy S9 because it's easier to transfer that footage, and you've got that expandable micro SD card slot, which makes it great for storing lots of photos and videos on the cheap. Now, I am giving away a Razer phone right now. I'll have a link in the top comment down below, and I'll be doing lots of giveaways in the future, and I'll update that top comment to whatever the latest giveaway I'm doing is. Be sure to go check that out if you'd like to enter and potentially win a new smartphone or whatever I happen to be giving away at the time. All right, that's it for this camera comparison with the Galaxy S9 and the iPhone 10. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I tried to be as thorough as possible, to be as helpful as possible. We'll see you next time. Brandon out.